All right, hello everyone.
Hey. We're back. We're a little bit late. I got stuck in traffic, but we are back.
Yes, and hopefully you'll understand more about appraisals after this.
Yeah. So this is we're gonna break down the appraisal report for you, and actually this is our third. This is like our third live.
I think so. Yeah, 3, maybe 4.
Yeah.
We're getting pros at this now.
So, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Either way, but if you want to, get acclimated, since you had to drive over here, I've been just sitting in this little desk. So I basically just pulled up an appraisal, and I just thought I could kind of like run down it a little bit and start off explaining what the appraisal is. Well, I guess should we introduce ourselves?
Oh yeah, that's right.
I'm Faith Watkins with Guild Mortgage. I'm a senior loan officer, and I've been in the business since 2011. And this is my friend Tatiana.
Yeah, Tatiana is an Ellis with EXP, and I've also been a full-time real estate agent since 2011, but licensed since 2007.
That's totally coincidence, by the way.
I know.
Yeah,
it is.
We just started at the same time. And then when did we meet? What year was that?
2015.
15?
It was actually during the ADU tour.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So,
the same year I hit your car.
The same year that you hit my car.
And here we are.
Here we are doing Facebook Live and talking about appraisals.
Right. Not reckoning the cross. So to start off with, the appraisal, as most people know, I think is the general valuation of the property, and the lender, and which is who I work for, has to have the valuation be what the sales price is, or valuation can be better, obviously. But essentially, when the valuation comes in, that determines that you're able to get the loan based on what that property is worth, according to the appraiser and comps in the area.
And we're mostly talking about buyers, right? But as a seller, you could get an appraisal because you might be doing like a refinance on your property, or you could be taking out a home equity line of credit, and then you need an appraisal, right? So we're talking about it as buyers and sellers.
Yeah, I deal with sellers like so little that thank you for bringing that in. I've definitely mostly buyers, and except for refinances here and there, but yeah, not quite. So the appraisal report itself is actually going to be quite lengthy. I think sometimes people are surprised when they buy their first home to get their appraisal report, and it's 30 plus pages. It's a pretty lengthy report, very detailed as you can imagine. And it is uniform. So every appraisal that comes through is on a standard form that has been designated by appraisal management companies and their governing body. The appraisal itself will come through the lender, so we order it, and then within 4 to 6 business days in the Multnomah County, or I guess Tri-County area, obviously everywhere can be different, is when the report will be returned after you order it, and then it'll have that valuation.
Yeah, and the turn, what we call the turn times, or the time that the appraisal gets ordered until the time that the actual appraiser goes out to the property, that time frame has really decreased. I remember just a couple years ago, appraisals were out like
45 days was the longest appraisal. Yeah, I remember I had to have
it was insane. I had one that was 3 months.
Oh my god! I remember that. That is insane.
Yeah. So it's actually really good now, because we can kind of go back to, if I'm representing a buyer, Faith and I are helping our buyer client, we can go back to getting through the initial inspection and repairs negotiations, and then ordering the appraisal, and we're still going to be within the timeline for the actual closing. So that's really good, actually.
Yeah, super. Yeah, that is great, because there were some times where I remember it's like we had to order the appraisal yesterday in order to get things through. So yeah, doing it now where it's like you actually feel like you have the time to make proper negotiations with those inspections is definitely, I think it takes a load off of everybody. Sure. So getting back into the report itself, there will typically be anywhere from about 3 to 9 comparables, depending, and it can be a 90-day sale, which is most ideal within 90 days, but I've seen some up to almost a year in time frame in which it's sold, and I think it just really depends on the property type. If the property like exactly matches yours, and it seems like inside out quality and etc., which we'll get into a little bit more, I've seen 9 months as of recently, and they're justified. And so the other thing is it's within a mile radius, but sometimes you know that if you go across the street, you're in a different neighborhood. And so appraisers that know the area will know that you're going to stay, let's say north or south of Lombard, depending on what neighborhood you're in, to get a accurate valuation based on the neighborhood.
Right, and usually the appraisals are also looking for like the year built. So in some of the older neighborhoods of Portland, and if they're maybe appraising a 1925 bungalow, there's usually plenty of those that have sold because that was the typical home style back in 1925. So there's usually plenty. Or if you're in a subdivision, like if you're out in like Beaverton or Happy Valley and there's a subdivision and those are really good comps for the house that you're purchasing, that makes it slam dunk. But yeah, I was working with an appraiser recently because he was appraising a house with a ADU. And he had to go out 12 months just because there's less properties that have, it was a fully permitted ADU. It wasn't like potentially an ADU or maybe an ADU.
It was.
Yeah, it was an ADU. So yeah, just going back to your point that generally speaking, the appraisers are looking for comps that are pretty recent. So that's about 90 days.
Yeah, and getting on that too with an ADU, for instance, because there are fewer and farther between, sometimes an appraiser will get bigger radius of where the ADU is at. So it might not be as close as typical comps because there's not as many ADUs as there are.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe we already said
that.
So the next thing is, this one, it can be a big one, is subject to items.
Right.
Because subject to items require certain repairs to be done based off of the appraiser's going down the checklist of requirements that the property needs to meet in order to be lendable. And so then they become lender required repairs. And those repairs will need to be finished by the time the loan closes. And typically the repairs can happen like right up into the day that we close, and we just need what's called a 1004D re-inspect report, because the appraiser will need to go back out to the property and verify that the repairs have been done to workman's like satisfaction.
Right.
And or depending on if they're like smaller repairs, sometimes even just taking like little pictures of it if it's like something needs to be screwed in properly or a railing or whatever that is.
Strapping a hot water tank is something that we see a lot.
Big one, yeah.
And then also just making sure that there's CO detectors and smoke detectors. So usually we take photos of those and then send them over to you.
Yeah, totally.
Or the appraiser.
Yes. Indeed. And then the other piece I was going to say on the report is you'll see pictures. You'll see exterior and interior pictures of the property, and then exterior pictures of the comps in the area. And so that's my robust appraisal commentary.
Awesome.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah. So
fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I will fill in the gaps because some of the questions I get frequently especially from buyers, is what happens if the appraisal comes in below the contract price?
It's a very big question.
Right, because there's a lot of
Huge
just
concern.
uncertainty and there's a lot of concern about that. And I don't think, what do you think? What have you seen? I mean, in the whole 8 years I've been selling real estate, I think I've had 5 low appraisals. 5.
Yeah.
So, and the sales price is going to be what the seller has agreed to and what the buyer has agreed to. And usually that's somewhere in the ballpark of what market value is, what a willing and able qualified buyer is able to purchase a property for. So it's good that I've only had about 5 problems. What do you see?
Yeah, I was going to say very similar. I was actually kind of like running the numbers in my head, and I think it's probably roughly about that. I don't know. I've done like over 400 loans in my career, and I've seen maybe 5 low appraisals, but it tends to be, I think, buyers' biggest concern. So it's really interesting. I think it's just a matter of the unknown. They just don't have
Reference.
the understanding. Right. And then in the end, some of the appraisals that I've had seen come in lower, they hopefully able to renegotiate with the seller, and that ends up kind of, I guess, keeping it from being a problem, keeping it from going forward.
Right. So the Oregon sales contract allows for 2 business days, and generally you can negotiate a little bit more than that time if an appraisal comes in on the low side. So if it does, then usually I would hear from Faith And usually, do you usually call the buyers too, or you usually just call me?
Well,
Or
it
your
depends on
agent.
whatever you want. So
Yeah.
I'll call the agent first. That's
Yeah.
definitely my first call, so
Yeah.
we can kind of strategize what the best option is.
Right.
And then I'll comply with whatever you would like.
Right, right. And then usually I tell, so the agent is gonna tell their client, and then usually we tell the seller's agent, so that everybody's on the same page.
Mhm.
And so the options are, if it does come in lower than the contract price, depending on how much lower, sometimes it's really just a negotiation between the buyers and the sellers. Will the sellers lower the sales price a little bit?
Mhm.
Can the buyers bring forward a few thousand more dollars? Can they meet in the middle? Sometimes if we're just talking about $2,500, usually we don't see that though. Usually it's like a bigger amount. But if we're talking about something small, usually we can work that out.
Mhm.
The other thing that I've done with some success, about 50% success, is to dispute an appraisal.
Mm.
And that would mean that we would be looking through the whole entire appraisal report to see if maybe the appraiser missed a really good comp for the property, or maybe they have that comp in the appraisal report but it's not reported correctly, like maybe the square foot
Mhm.
is off, or maybe the bedrooms are off, or something that, basically we sort of do like a quality analysis on it.
Mhm.
And then what I would have to do is I would have to look out to the multiple listing service and actually bring into consideration other properties that could be considered
Mhm. To support that value.
support the value. And I've had about 50% success with that.
Same. I was gonna say, when I've done it, I wanted to jump in when you were talking about it, and that
Yeah.
when there are low ones, I always give it an option to agents to do that, and then if the borrower consents, then they can send the report to the agent so they can look over it to decide whether or not that seems feasible. And I've actually seen some appraisals come in low, and both agents are like, we can't come up with anything different.
Right.
But when we can, and each time I've submitted it, I would say we have about a 50-50 success rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes then the appraisal will actually respond with a pretty lengthy reason why he gave the comps and the value that he did, and then either he or she will give an increased value or not. And when you do the reconsideration, you're actually not supposed to talk about value, so to speak. You're just talking about like the pieces that were missed that obviously would help to support the value.
Right. So that's generally what happens. Have you had any sale fails? I haven't had any sale fails because of low appraisals. So that's, I think that's
I have.
Have you?
Yeah. I've had people not meet.
Not meet
Or
in the
that,
middle.
where buyer didn't think that it was, obviously they didn't want to pay more, and when it came
Right.
in low, and then the seller wasn't willing to negotiate. So
Right.
I have maybe 2 or 3 that I've
Yeah.
lost.
Okay.
Or
So that's a very low percentage.
Yes.
Very low percentage.
Yeah.
I think that's it for kind of low appraisals, right? Generally we're almost at the end of the transaction at that point, and so the will of the buyer and the seller to meet in the middle or to come up with some sort of creative solution, I would think would be at the highest.
Yes, especially if there are other things that are in place, movers, people got other houses that are contingent, that sort of thing.
Right. So generally, I would say we can usually work that out.
Yeah.
And then usually the appraisals come in probably right at contract price. Is that about right? You're seeing
Yes,
most of them?
for the most, I would say yes. And the only reason I'm laughing is because every now and then it'll be like, a few thousand different or something, which, that's great. If you find a value that seems to support it, that gives you that extra nudge. But I would say usually right at contract price. But as a buyer, if the appraisal comes in higher than your sales price, then I always tell people you can do like a little fist pump, and then you're able to move forward. And that's one of those things where you paid for it, so you're not able to, or you don't need to disclose it to the seller. Ultimately, we just say that it's at value.
Right. And so when I'm representing a buyer and we have the appraisal report come in, as long as we don't have any issues with it, like we don't have subject to, repairs or conditions, and the value is supported, that's all I say, is that we are at value. So if the appraisal came in $5,000 over, which means that the buyers have kind of instant equity when they close, I'm not going to disclose that because that's really none of the seller's business. It's really the buyer's report. So like you said, they paid for it, it's the report.
And there was agreed upon sales price based on both sides, both parties doing comps to find those justified values. So
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then that's great. And then once the appraisal report comes in, and if there are no subject to items and it meets value, then you work towards a clear to close. And then from our perspective, we can close in about a week. And then you're at the end of the transaction. So I usually tell people when they're ready, like people who are still living in rentals, that's a great time to put in your notice. Once underwriting's approved and the appraisal's back and everything looks good, then you can give your notice to move into a new property. Yeah, I always say that because I people ask me in the beginning, can I put in my notice now? I'm like, wait.
I feel like,
a lot too. Yeah, I feel like the appraisal and the underwriting piece are really big parts. And then once those are done, I think it's better to pay an extra few $100s than to be totally stressed if for some reason the appraisal came back subject to, and then all of a sudden we had to do work, and then vendors weren't available to do the roof or whatever, or maybe it's raining, and so you just want to give yourself a little buffer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that this is completely off the topic, but the appraisals actually go into quite a bit of detail. Like Faith was mentioning, it's a uniform appraisal report, and there's these condition codes. So that's a little bit different topic, but the condition codes go from C1 all the way up to C6. C1 being new construction, where there hasn't even been an occupant yet, so built completely new from the ground up. And then C6 being an almost tear down property that probably would not, almost not be financeable.
Yeah, maybe renovation loan only.
Yeah, renovation loan, yeah. So the C6's improvements have substantial damage, deferred maintenance, deficiencies, defects, severe enough to affect the safety, soundness, and structural integrity of the improvements. When they talk about improvements, it's just meaning like the dwelling. So that sounds like a tear down to me. And probably would be cash only or maybe a rehab loan.
Yeah.
And then C1, like I mentioned, is the new construction. And then C2 through C5 is a varying degree of, if kitchens were updated, if there was, new paint. It actually goes into quite a bit of detail. C2 is no deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance would be something like, you haven't cleaned your roof in about 25 years and there's a ton of moss on there, and maybe you got a little bit of dry rot like on the fascias, and maybe your siding is peeling, and the siding needs to be scraped and painted. So those are some of the typical things, and obviously an appraiser is going to see those things, so that would be considered deferred maintenance. Let's see, little or no physical depreciation and no required repairs. So that's C2. So that's basically one level up from brand new construction.
Okay.
And then C3 is well-maintained, limited physical depreciation, and normal wear and tear. And then C4 is some deferred maintenance and physical deterioration due to normal wear and tear. Adequately maintained, requires maybe only minimal repairs to building mechanical systems and cosmetic repairs. And then C5 is one level below really a tear down. So C5 is obvious deferred maintenance in need of some significant repairs, building components, repairs, rehab, or updating. Functional utility, overall livability is somewhat diminished due to the condition.
Yeah. So that one, yeah, definitely cash or renovation on that one as well.
Yeah, right. So I thought that's interesting, and a lot of borrowers don't read the full report.
Yes. And then I like that, which was right below that too, the quality as well, because there's the quality one when it's you're buying a mansion and and really brand new finishes and really high quality updated stuff, and then Q6 being very low quality. May not be. It actually says may not be suitable for year-round occupancy. Okay,
so it could be like a summer cabin. Or
Okay.
something like that. Yeah, and then obviously the appraisers are going to see if there's updating, no updating, or if it's been remodeled. So they're going to take in consideration the physical characteristics as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
good stuff. Well, if you have any more questions, let us know. Otherwise, it's always fun to kind of talk about our business and be able to get information out there. It's like, I don't realize how much I know about something. So I start talking about, oh yeah, I know about this appraisal stuff. So thanks for tuning in.
All right. And we'll see you next month with a new topic.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.